Hey, it's Eric G. Around the House is sponsored by Baldwin Hardware. For 75 years, Baldwin Hardware has been known for its first-class quality and craftsmanship in door and cabinetry hardware. As an alumnus of the Baldwin Hardware Design Council, I can say I have seen the details and quality from design to the finished product. If you're looking for a new style and old-world craftsmanship, I can tell you there is only one Baldwin Hardware. Check out what would look great in your home at baldwinhardware.com.
It's Around the House.
So, Walt, I got a question for you. If you were, let's put you in a homeowner's shoes here right now. If you are getting ready to maybe build an ADU out back or do an addition or something like that, do you run in? Where would you start looking for a WRB, weather-resistant barrier, to do your house with?
My first conversation is going to be with my contractor. And the reason being is the contractor may have a system that they just enjoy using, they're comfortable using, or their team's already set up to use. And then I would go back and research that product and make sure that, you know what, it sounded like it was a reasonable product to me as well. I find that a lot of failures in these projects come because the homeowner's like, oh, you know what? I researched this and I really like this product.
When it comes to remodeling and renovating your home, there is a lot to know, but we've got you covered. This is Around the House.
Welcome to Around the House with Eric G. and Caroline B., your one-stop shop for home improvement, interior design, and construction. Hey, Caroline, how are you today?
Hello, everybody. So excited for our guest today. He's always
my brother.
Yeah.
From another mother, Walt Tamala, TNT General Contracting, and a guy that I share the stage with plenty of time educating contractors. Welcome back to Around the House, my brother.
Caroline, thanks so much. I appreciate being here and you having me back on.
This is always fun, right, Caroline?
I love his expertise and I love his building science experience. So to me, it's like always a learning experience, Walt. So thanks.
Oh, no, thank you. No, I love talking about this stuff. And you know how important it is while we're out there. We see so many good things that are being done and so many bad things. And, you know, I chalk off half the bad things to people just not knowing how to do it right. So the more we're having these conversations, the better off our whole industry is. Absolutely.
And today I want to talk about house wraps, or what other people are in the industry call weather-resistant barriers, and the differences. And this is not by any means any kind of a sponsor-influenced segment. This is something that there are no sacred cows here. We're going to talk about the differences between brands and stuff out there that we see from our perspective, so that we don't have anybody sitting in here going, hey, pitch us, do this, which is kind of the basis of Around the House anyway. But we're just going to have an honest conversation. That way we're not bringing in a spokesperson from a company right now to talk about it. We're bringing in an expert that teaches us stuff for many different brands.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different brands that are out there, so many different options. Eric, I don't know about you guys in your neck of the woods in the country here. I know we're on opposite coasts. In Caroline, we share the same coast, but we're still a few hours away from each other. But there's so many different opportunities, whether you're buying from a big box store or if you're buying from your local lumberyard to a Rockies or anything. It's like, well, which one should I be using and why? And with today's day and age, one of the big answers is the system that you can actually get, right? What's available where you're at. And do they sell the whole package? Not just a roll. Do they sell the tape? Do they sell the fasteners? Do they sell the adhesives? Everything that go along with it? Because just that supply chain for the last 2 years has really shrunk for a lot of areas.
And when we're talking about house wraps too, so we can think about it as a whole project if somebody were to build, right, to start a new build. But then we also have the issue of, like I just did, we're replacing a window, we're replacing a door, we're putting in something, we're changing a part of the house. So do you stay consistent with the original house wrap you had? Like for my home, I had a felt paper, right? I didn't have a Tyvek. Or if you have Tyvek, do you go to another type of system? So I'd love to get your take on that. Like when you open up a big can of worms at the house, do you stay with what you consistently have or do you change it?
Yeah, I find that, being in Massachusetts, probably 75 to 80% of my work is remodeling, and we're dealing with old housing inventory. So a lot of the times when we rip off that exterior cladding, we don't know what to expect, what we're going to find. If it's just tar paper, if it was some rosin paper, if there's nothing there, because at that point in time, they're here like, hey, let the air flow through the house. Houses need to breathe.
Let it breathe.
Yes, let it breathe. I can't tell you how many times we've had that conversation here in New England. But I find that my go-to is always making sure that that door, that window is sealed properly to the sheathing, so that you're going direct to the plywood, the wood, the tongue and groove, whatever it is. Make sure that it's sealed tight to that first. And then if you had felt paper, integrate another WRB, whether it is a wrap, because that's probably the easiest and the most accessible to folks. Or if they have a peel and stick product that they could use, even an ice and water. I see a lot of folks that will just grab some ice and water that's also used for roofing to seal whatever sheathing has been exposed, and then have their old felt paper sit over the top of that. The big thing when it comes to that is your old stuff should always overlap the new stuff, so it water sheds properly. And then anything that could be coming from above, which is hitting your old WRB, your felt paper in your situation, then rolls on top of what you put down new and sheds off onto the ground. That way, again, that water has no way of getting behind it and back into the building.
That makes sense. So, Walt, you see out there, and especially out here on the West Coast where I'm at, this is something that in the Pacific Northwest where I'm located ends up being a huge problem. We have a lot of 6-story multi-use residential / commercial buildings out there, or even condo units that are 3 or 4 stories high, but they start framing here in the rainy season in October. And by the time they get it framed out, it's December, and they're starting to throw the roof on, and all the OSB or plywood on the outside of that is black. Yeah. And then I drive by the next week, and they've got guys out there on lifts wrapping around, whatever brand house wrap. It could be Tyvek. It could be a Home Depot or Lowe's branded product, or any of the other dozen companies out there. And I always shake my head and go, wow, we are trapping all of that quote unquote junk that is mold, mildew, or whatever contaminations on the outside of that right inside the building, inside the living area.
You know what that terminology is called, right? You can't see it from my house.
Yeah.
I mean, it's terrible. Once it's covered, it's like, no, that WRB is doing its job. But do you really want to cover something that has been sitting for that long? Even though the manufacturer says, hey, it has a 30 or 60-day exposure ratio, that's to UVs and everything else. That's not to the moisture climate and everything else. And then if you have a really rainy season like you guys do, I mean, come on, you need to have a WRB that's probably integrated like the zip system, so that as it's being installed, it's being watertight and waterproofed at the same point in time.
Yeah.
Other areas, if you don't have that kind of moisture, you can get away with using, the regular wraps and everything else. And if you're in sunny California, where, you're down in San Diego, you're not getting a ton of rain, then go right ahead, use your Tyvek, your Typars. There's so many different wraps, and whatever ones are accessible to you, go ahead. But you know what? Don't let the product sit there and test it to see if, didn't it last 190 days, 280 days? I mean, come on. We got to use a little built-in sense.
Do you do that with your milk in the fridge? That's what I always say. Do you do that with your milk in the fridge? Do you go, hey, that's 10 days past its use by date. Wonder how good this is, and pour it across your Wheaties in the morning? No, you don't. Don't do it with your house wrap either.
Well, it was interesting. I have contractors working on my house, and they were telling Eric, and I had Eric on speaker, that even the plywood now, they literally got a little bit of moisture and some rain, and the plywood started to delaminate and sort of come apart. So the glues and things that they're using, whether it's because they're, what we call a greener, or, maybe they're using less of it. Maybe the product manufacturing isn't so great anymore because of, quality control, who knows? But they said that even in the Northeast with a little bit of rain, these things are starting to come apart. So I found that kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But, it's.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that as well. And not necessarily on our own projects, because obviously, we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's and weather tightening right away. But we've definitely seen it. Some of the feedback that I've got, Caroline, is that due to outsourcing and the lack of a lot of the resins in the industry right now, they've substituted, and, they did testing. They're trying to do their best to make sure that what they're putting out was consistent with their original products. But a lot of these resins and everything else just aren't holding up or aren't testing out the way they thought they were going to. But they had to do something to keep pushing product out there.
Yep.
Yeah, you got to, there was so much demand for it. Look at what the cost of plywood went up to. I mean, in our area, we're paying up to $80 a sheet for 1/2-inch plywood. Yeah. I mean, it was crazy. All these TikToks and everything else about, they'll trade you a Corvette for a sheet of plywood.
They weren't wrong.
No, it's crazy. So I get it to a point, but that means we've got to do our due diligence as the installers and the contractors to make sure, we're being even more careful and cautious, and that install goes smooth, and we're taking care of and covering that product as soon as possible, so it's not exposed to the elements and everything else.
So, Walt, I got a question for you. Let's put you in a homeowner's shoes here right now. If you're getting ready to maybe build an ADU out back or do an addition or something like that, where would you start looking for a WRB, weather-resistant barrier, to do your house with?
My first conversation is going to be with my contractor. And the reason being is the contractor may have a system that they just enjoy using, they're comfortable using, or their team's already set up to use. And then I would go back and research that product and make sure that, it sounded like it was a reasonable product to me as well. I find that a lot of failures in these projects come because the homeowner's like, oh, you know what? I researched this and I really like this product. And the builder's like, yeah, I've heard of that product. I don't use it. I use this instead. But yeah, if that's what you want, I'll use it. No problem.
Yeah.
I got a great example of a very good friend of mine who's the national rep for a product worldwide that he reps here in the U.S. And he did a build out 6 years ago, and now they're adding on to it. And he just tore the siding off himself with his kids. They wanted to do a nice summer project because he was around. In the past, he was traveling a lot. And back when he did it, he asked for blueskin. Mm-hmm. So as he's tearing apart this build out, the front of the building was all done in blueskin. But the other 3 sides, after he started travel, were all done with Typar. And I'm like, oh, my God. And he's like, why would they do this? And I'm like, well, blueskin was new to the market, and the builder and his team probably just didn't know how to use it. Yeah. Right. And they struggled to make it look good and to apply it properly. So the minute that the front was done and they ran out of the materials that they had there, they just ordered Typar.
Yep.
Now, that probably would have been fine if they went through and you now have a completely sealed WRB with blueskin, right? Yep. And now the Typar, they rolled it out. They never taped any of the seams. They didn't make it an air barrier. They didn't do anything to integrate it into the other system. And you know what? Those 2 products actually can be integrated to a point because of acrylic bases and such as far as the tapes go. But it's like, what if they weren't compatible? One could eat the other product up. So yeah, I think it's really, really important to figure out what your contractor uses and then make sure that they're comfortable using whatever product you may have researched that you felt is a better product. So make sure you find that contractor that you're comfortable working with and that is listening to you.
You both know so much about zip systems. And so like a lot of our audience may not. So explain to them over the years how this has changed, right? How we had, let's say, OSB, MDF, plywood with a felt barrier. And now we've gone to these zip systems and what they are and how they protect the homeowner.
Eric, you want to jump on that?
I can jump on that one. So, it used to be, in the 70s, you would see, just as new as that, you'd see a lot of just people out there. They'd frame the house up. They'd literally tack that staple on that felt paper, which is just roofing felt, right on the studs, put the T111 right along that. And all of a sudden you're good to go and you're cruising, you're caulking it in, you're painting it, and there you go. And then you started seeing house wraps come in, which was kind of the next thing. And you saw like the DuPonts, the Tyvek, that kind of stuff that came in. And you'd see it just get stapled around, but it wasn't really, you didn't see the tapes being used by most of the contractors. It was just we got the house wrap up.
Right. And they had a lot of problems because some of those plastic wraps weren't breathable. They went with just a solid plastic at first. Remember, it wasn't perforated. And then they had all this sweating and mold. You were just like in a solid plastic fishbowl. And then they said, oopsie, we need to have some breathability. So then they went to more vapor permeable substances.
I mean, there was a time when I remember they were teaching to take just sheets of plastic on the inside of the house and staple it up
Remember that,
before
though?
you put the drywall up for energy efficiency.
Yes.
And I remember sitting in the class going, really? Is that what we're doing?
Where does the vapor barrier belong? And is that the same thing as a WRB? No, that's a whole other topic, right?
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what you're talking about, Eric, is an interior vapor barrier. And it's like, I still have code arguments with code enforcement officials up here that an interior vapor barrier is not
So
a good
bad.
idea.
Yeah.
So we actually had to do classes on that. We do a vapor open, so I do no vapor barrier. So just for the people listening out there, only one vapor barrier on a house, no matter where it is, on the interior or the exterior. You can only have one. Otherwise, you're going to trap moisture.
And that's a mold sandwich with 2 pieces of vapor barrier on either side.
You better believe it.
I'm in business.
A WRB, a WRB or an air barrier, you can have multiple layers if you want to, because they're permeable. They allow air and moisture to pass through it, so that you're never going to trap it and cause that mold problem.
Amen. I mean, that's it. And if you do the double vapor barrier, that's money for Caroline.
I like it. I'm coming in with mold testing, and you're going to fail. You're going to have mold in your
And
walls.
one thing, Walt, that I've seen, and of course we have continued to evolve, and now you're getting into the zip system. But, it wasn't that long ago that I was running into stuff, and this is by no means a knock on Tyvek, but I would see in the Pacific Northwest a lot of cedar shingles and things like that. People would put the Tyvek up. We'd go in and do a remodel, and you tear it off, and you're like, wow, what shredded this WRB behind it? And you'd see that with the new products.
And there's so many different chemicals that are in products. And for your exact example there, all the coastal areas where you're using cedar shakes or the required, when they're dipped, a lot of the oils, the resins, and everything else that come out of the cedar will actually eat a wrap.
Really? That's interesting.
And Tyvek happens to be one of the best, the highest perm rating house wraps out there. I like the product. I've used it for many, many years. But anytime I had cedar shakes that were being direct applied, a lot of folks thought it was the nail or the corrosion to the galvanization of the nails. But it is actually the resins and everything else in the cedar that then starts to tear
That's
that house
incredible.
apart.
Because I have a cedar house. So I find it, and I'm bad because I've always used felt. My whole house has been it. But I've also do flashing and all kinds of milled aluminum and, things like that, the extra things that people don't do. But yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad I never.
And
Caroline,
it's not the nails, because I mean, when you pull that off, and it looks like it's just been sitting out in the weather for 20 years.
Right.
It's shredded. It looks like an old tarp that sat outside for 2 decades.
It really looks like it was on the outside of the building instead of behind the siding. And Caroline, you brought up a great point. Felt is a fantastic product to put underneath it because of the oil base and just how durable that product is, that it resists all of the resins that are then in that cedar shake.
Yeah, that's what I use.
So that's a great WRB for behind it. Or you're usually doubling up your WRB. That way one's taking a beating and absorbing all those, and the one behind it is then protecting the structure.
But then you start getting into, okay, you've got zip system and some of these other pieces out here. And I like DuPont. I like Zip. These are all great, Huber, great people out there. But now you've got products now where it's built into the plywood, into the sheathing system, which is another whole different way of doing it.
Yeah, and as all those Huber guys will tell you, and our folks will tell you, is that coating is impregnated into the skin of that OSB. And I know there's been so many tests and so many controversial discussions about overpenetration with a nail and how much moisture then gets into that OSB because overdriven nails can be an issue no matter what you're doing. That's why all these WRBs, the wraps and everything else have cap wraps so that the staple doesn't penetrate and go too far through. So I know that, Huber's done a good job at doing their testing and figuring this stuff out. Their seam tapes and everything else bond very well. That acrylic base tape is probably one of the best on the market. And all of these, I don't care what system you're using, I want people to know this and just remember this, is they're all pressure release tapes.
Yes.
If you don't put 30 pounds of pressure on any of these tapes, you could walk away and a year later pull the siding off, and all that tape will have released. You'll have bubbles, or they'll have peeled right off because they just didn't have enough pressure to bond and get an adhesion to that surface.
So if you have a contractor out there working, installing this, and they don't have a roller in their hand, they're not doing it right.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll go out to my own job sites and I'll be like, hey, where's your speed square? Is that in your pouch? Is that what you're using? Because I don't like the sharp edge of that. You could cut and tear some tape, especially if you're on like the inside corner where the two house wraps meet. Yep. And, the siding's going to get butted to each other. That's a troubled area. I go, where's your tuck tool? Where's your roller? Because that's the only way you're going to get that pressure. And they're like, I use the palm of my hand because you've told me I can get 30 pounds of pressure on the palm of my hand. And be like, yes. And then you'll walk away from the job site with 450 slivers from the day. But you go ahead and try that. No, be safe, be smart, and you just have a roller. Take your hammer out of your pouch and put the roller in. It goes in the same holder.
So explain to me, you guys, it's all in one now with the zip, correct? So let's say in replace of your felt paper, you're going to have the zip system and it's actually connected to the OSB. It comes in one panel. So there's it's all together. So no more, more piece of plywood or just OSB, and then you've got to wrap it. And then you connect these two. So as they go up, just like you would install plywood, and you tape between them. Is that what happens?
Tape over the top of them. So you're going to want to get to 2 to 3 inches of tape on each side of that seam. Okay. And that way it has plenty of surface area to bond to. And then same thing happens as you're flashing. Think of it this way. You put the 2 bottom sheets on. Okay. Wherever that seam is vertically, you're going to tape that seam. Now, when your next 2 sheets go on top of it, you're going to tape that horizontal seam because you still want the taping to be water shedding the proper direction, the upper tape overlapping onto the lower tape. And then again, as you carry up the wall, you just keep taping those seams in that pattern. And as long as you're rolling it, by the end of that day, that wall that you just put up is watertight from the outside.
Which is great. And then the other thing with that too, it's very interesting, is you have to be careful with how tight you put these sheets together when you're framing it up. You've got to give a little space in there. And I know so many people go, I'm just going to get it just super tight. That's not the answer sometimes.
Eric, I was on a job site down in Virginia. We were visiting with another builder, and he's doing like 80 condos. And literally he's like, Walt, he goes, the workforce is a little tough right now. He goes, everybody knows that 1/8 inch spacing in between these panels, up to 1/4 inch max, because it is still wood. It's still going to breathe. It's still going to shrink and expand. He goes, but look at the front of this building. He goes, it's super tight. Like, we have no tape up yet. They come and tape afterwards. I was like, all right, I get that. I don't mind having 2 different crews. If your framer just wants to run and gun, let them. But as long as you have someone coming back that's more waterproofing and making sure the tape goes on properly and everything's sealed and caulking and stuff. But these panels were all tight. And then when you walk to the back of the building, because it's 3 stories, there are 2-inch strips of zip missing.
Wow.
And they're like, we literally just tape over the top of it because we use 6-inch tape instead of 4. What? I'm like, that defeats the whole purpose.
Yeah.
No missing
yes,
zip.
there are tolerances, and you gotta read the instructions, and you gotta pay attention to it, because these tapes are great, but they're not that good.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's the key too. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that I was down visiting our friend David Applebaum, who shows up on the show a lot here and comments on social media. We were in front of his old condo, and I'm standing out there looking at this, and we're down in California, and I'm looking up going, what are they doing? They had built, Walt, these 3 kind of townhomes all in a row, but they had a firewall in between them. So there was a 6-inch gap between the buildings. They had Tyvek when they tilted the walls up.
Okay.
But they couldn't site it. And they ended up siting, but it left this huge gap in there that was a 6-inch gap between the buildings. It was the weirdest thing. All the windows were done incorrectly. It was not flashed right. They had pre-done the house wrap around the windows and left it there. Mm-hmm. But when they came back over and started wrapping it, the flashing and everything was under the house wrap, not over it.
Oh, God.
So any water that got through that was going to go now under the house wrap, not over.
Yeah, to the head of the window.
Yeah.
Yep, underneath the flashing.
And so they were directing the water inside, not outside.
Yeah, and Eric, I've seen some gaps in my life, but I only use up to like a 1-inch backer rod. I haven't seen a 6-inch backer rod yet.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my God.
That's like just a hole.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
But in Southern California, they might get away with that. But up here, in a month or two, any water gets behind that, you got a hot mess.
But even those Southern California people, I have so many clients now, they're all having mold problems. Like my last 6 clients have been from Los Angeles or surrounding areas within LA County. And with massive mold problems in crawl spaces, basements, and attics. And like then I start talking to them and I'm checking the relative humidity in the space. And they're running like 60% relative humidity, like right outside LA County. And that's weird to me. So there has to be some kind of climate stuff going on because they typically did not have that kind of humidity there. And I know that's happening in San Francisco as well and other places. But, and then of course, because of the fires, they're building, they're changing all the roofing and it's not contracting and expanding. They used to have the old shingled roofs that were wood in California and you guys would expand and contract with the heat. So now they're using asphalt. And we're seeing all this moisture condensation happening because the attics are getting so hot and the first floors are cold with air conditioning. So everybody's got mold. Doesn't matter where you're at anymore.
Yeah. It all comes down to the assembly, right? And I mean, I know we're just talking WRBs, but you bring up a great point. That becomes our thermal barrier. You got your WRB, you have your air barrier, your weather barrier. That thermal barrier is such a key component. Because if you can't manage the conditioned spaces and you allow any of that to come into the unconditioned space, you're going to have issues, major issues.
And, my opinion, California is fairly lax on waterproofing compared to where I'm located. That you can still hot tar mop a shower pan. And, and I don't see that anywhere up here. I could, if I wanted to do it, I don't know who I'd call. I'd have to get a roofing company to come by to do it. So you're seeing where a lot of their stuff, their ventilation, a lot of that stuff is kind of behind the 8 ball compared to other areas. And I think that's reflecting in what you're dealing with. And you see a lot of slab on grade. You see water leaking through shower pans into that slab. And so now it's soaking up that water or it's showing up in another area. It's one of those things that water, you could have a slab on grade home and the shower pan's leaking. Well, it's going into the pad area and it can pop up in a crack in a bedroom. And so all of a sudden you've got wet carpet, 10 feet away and it's all coming out of the shower pan, but it's showing up on a crack in the bedroom down the hallway.
And in California, they have all the mountain, the mountain areas. So a lot of these houses are built right into the side of a mountainside. So you've got something that's under, subgrade, slightly subgrade because of the mountain. And then the other side's outside. So you're getting those different differentials in temperature that happen from the cooler ground versus the hot air temperature. So that could be an issue too.
Yeah. And how do you incorporate your WRB into that model right there, right? So the rear of your house is built into a mountain. So it's all concrete, it's pinned. And then, a lot of builders will then take and put their WRB, even if it's a wrap at that point in time, over the framed portion. Some of them are sealing it to the concrete, which is the rear wall, and then cladding or doing some kind of a siding over the top of it. But how do you really get a good bond and adhesion to that? I mean, I've seen some builders now that are using fluid applied over the entire exterior of their buildings, which is also a WRB. Yeah. And it's an expensive one, but it's one where it bonds to concrete, to wood, everything, and it just makes it one continuous layer.
You answered the question right there. That's kind of what you'd have to do in that situation.
And a lot of these people don't want to spend the money. Well, that becomes the issue too. Like they're blown out of the water at the cost of their remediation, and then they've got to do, say they had their HVAC down there. So you're looking at $30,000 for a new HVAC system, and then you're looking at mold remediation, and then you're looking at any, let's say carpentry work you have to do. And then when you say, oh wait, you've got to fix your moisture or thermal problem, they're like, what? I don't want to do that. They're like, what are you talking about?
And it's kind of easy for the three of us to sit back and be like, wow, it's crazy that they would not spend their money on these control layers, because they're the most important part of the house, whether it's the insulation, the WRB, the components that you don't get to see, because if these are done right, then all of a sudden maybe that HVAC is a $20,000 system instead of a 30.
That's true.
But the reality is, like, they still want their granite or Corian quartz tops. They want the things that look nice, and they want the components that just make it feel like home. And I think that's the biggest challenge we have, is educating our homeowners that, you know, you got to start with good structure, good bones. We always say that when I walk into a house. Right? You know, the bones are good in this house.
Eric and I say that all the time. And, we're like, our houses have good bones. Like,
yeah, right. Well, so yeah, and that for me goes to pulling some of the siding off when we're looking for an inspection or a trim board, seeing what's underneath it, so you kind of know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, no question. And you know, that's one of the things too that I learned a lot when you and I were on the stage down at our friends down at SEBC, the Southeastern Building Conference down there. You know, I had not worked a lot with zip. That is something that was new to me. And they brought up, you know, in the seminars, that things that I don't deal with out on the West Coast, you know, hurricane force winds. One of the advantages of that product is if you put that up there as roof sheathing, if you get a 120 mile an hour wind going through there and your shingles get ripped off, you still have a waterproof barrier that's going to sheet the rain off better than if it was just raw plywood or felt paper.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, because you're still using ice and water on this product afterwards, which is going to tie all those sheets together. But when you kind of use like a fortified system and you're nailing 4 inches on center and everything else, which you're supposed to be on coastal and high wind zones, like you do build a much stronger and better structure that's going to have an opportunity to outlast any of those storms.
And I think that's huge, just to get that water off of there. And that could really stop a lot of the water damage and even other wind damage by just keeping that water to the exterior, especially during the hurricanes and those kind of storms like that.
Yeah. And Zip has a great product. I remember when they first came out, you know me, Eric, I love to try every product when it comes out, just because I want to noodle with it. I want to figure out, you know.
Eric likes to do that too. You and Eric, that's why you're brothers, because you like to tinker with toys.
What's this? New stuff. Cool.
Exactly. Let's tear it apart, you know, because we want to break it down and see if we can make it fail. And then let's figure out how it works really well. And I remember the first few runs I did with it, and I just struggled with the Zip.
Yeah.
And they had in the very beginning a couple failures where, you know, it bleeded back or it bubbled up. So I just started putting house wrap over the top of it, because honestly, on a cold condition or windy conditions, the Zip would at least make everything watertight. And then when I had time, I could come back over it with a house wrap, and everybody laughed at me because I know it was an extra day's worth of work and maybe $500 worth of product. But I then had 2 WRBs that worked fine with each other because there was airflow and everything else between them. And it was just better all over, and it didn't slow down any of my production while I was out there working.
Smart. And that's not, and that's, I guess the nice thing here, spit it out, with that is that you don't have like 2 layers of plastic out there or something. You have a breathable surface on there that is going to let any trapped moisture leave the building and not let it inside.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and these...
I want your opinion, because I want you guys to try to convince me. Eric knows this. I am still a plywood, and Eric will argue with me, and I do agree with him that plywood has become more glues and resins than it used to be. Probably less breathable than it used to be, because we used to use plywood because it did have breathability as far as moisture, right? When we're talking about moisture can go in and out. It can, I like to explain it like, as moisture comes into wood can take on some moisture. And then when it dries out, it releases it back out. Think of it like a tree, right? A tree doesn't get all moldy and nasty. It takes on the wood, and wood gets moisture, and then it lets it back out, and the tree stands and it's fine. With OSB, the problem has always been that moisture does not permeate OSB as well. And we've done many studies on it that show that it prevents the moisture from traveling through. My problem with the Zip system is that it does contain OSB. I thought there was an option to choose plywood as your backer, but I don't think that that's true, right? I think it's all OSB. So for someone like me who's not a big OSB enthusiast, one, convinced me that OSB should be something that I'll look at. And 2, what's your take on it? I mean, if you were going to build, would you still build with, say, CDX, or would you build with an OSB Zip system?
So I'm going on year 29 of building for myself. Started this right out of high school. So when you start out of high school, you walk the road of hard knocks and you make a lot of mistakes, right? One of the things that I did for the first 20 years is I only used fir plywood. I mean,
nice.
I was up to a few years ago, that was still 5/8 fir ply. And it had to be a 5-ply on my roofs. And I would tell everybody, if you walk on a 24-inch on-center trussed roof system and you have 1/2-inch plywood, my non-tiny little structure bounces and moves way too much for me to feel comfortable.
Amen.
And 5/8 just doesn't move. I have found that I've gone to 16-inch on center for most of my roof framing and have backed away because adding 2 or 3 trusses was less expensive to get down to the 1/2-inch sheathing. And the caveat for me, Caroline, was that I took a piece of zip, their roof sheathing, which is the red board, and I put it out in my backyard for a year, exposed, and I just let it sit there. So New England, it snowed on it, it rained on it.
4 seasons.
The backside of it was all black and nasty by the time we were said and done. It had grade and everything else, but that top layer still looked good. So I then cut it and messed with it, and I tried to apply tape to it, and the tape still stuck to it. And I was like, you know what? I think that's a reasonable product now, and I'd be willing to put it on my own house. So I did it on a couple small projects, and I just found that, again, New England, we have the 4 seasons that change, so we don't like changing anything else in our repertoire, especially the way we build.
Yep.
But yeah, it proved that over time that it was a good product, and I do use it now. Not on every project. It all depends on if it's available, who has it in stock.
Yep.
But if I know if I'm going to be in wet conditions or I need to watertight that ASAP, that the zip system's going to get the nod for it.
And one thing too, Caroline, I have done some tests as well where I took, a 12 by 12 piece of OSB and a 12 by 12 piece of CDX and soak it in water. And in my experience recently, I've seen the plywood delaminate the exterior layer before the OSB comes apart.
Yeah, he's told me that before, which is interesting.
Yeah. And so I've even heard talking to some lumber people that they actually have the same glues in the OSB as they're using in the plywood. It's the same glue. And so it's just differently used. You have a sheet of veneer versus the oriented strands of OSB, but you still have wood products between them. The OSB does traditionally have more glue in it because it's
pieces,
you're holding little pieces together, but it's not that much more glue.
Yeah. Our interesting take on it is that the permeability of it with the moisture going through has a much harder challenge. So we see a lot of the houses not being able to pass moisture vapor and get rid of that vapor inside the house, which becomes a problem with this energy efficiency that I have to deal with. Okay, you guys shower in the house, you cook in the house, you breathe in the house, humidity gets in. What do I do with it? Because I can't have it stuck in there. Otherwise, everything starts to condensate and I get all kinds of, water dripping from your registers and your HVAC and that good stuff. So I'm always interested to see what you guys as builders think.
I think one of the things, Eric, I'll just jump in real quick on that. I think one of the things that I find and we do more and more of is because most of the houses or structures that we're building have less than 1 air exchange per hour, which means we're building a very tight house. So that it should be controllable, but you're bringing in mechanicals to condition and move that moisture to where it belongs, to the outside of the building. But again, with any piece of mechanical that you add, there has to become a piece of knowledge that we pass along to our homeowners so they know when something's going wrong, what to look for, not just, hey, did the red light shine on the machine? Because that means it's not working.
Yeah.
Because you don't really hear it running. So you got to know what to look for as you're using certain things like your stoves and your ovens and everything else. So
100%.
You're seeing this more and more where they're requiring a version of ice and water shield on the entire roof. It's not going to breathe at all when you put that on there. So whether or not the OSB breathes or the plywood breathes doesn't really matter because it's not coming out through the surface of that. There's no place for it to go when you're putting that level of waterproofing on the outside of it.
Is that good? That sounds terrible. It sounds like we shouldn't do that.
If we don't manage that attic temperature and everything else, you're right. It's terrible because, I think as long as ridge vents and soffit vents are still used properly, you're still ice and watering over that entire sheathing. I've done full ice and water on homes for years. all I'm doing is protecting the entire sheathing, but at the top, I'm still cutting a ridge vent. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a roofing company come in and the roofer or the framer dried in the roof. He ice and watered the whole thing because it's easy enough to have your lumberyard ship you the ice and water. So to make the builder happy, he's sheathed it, and then they've gone through and ice and watered the whole thing. And the roofer forgets to cut the ridge vent. They throw it on top because everything's already black, but they never cut the ridge vent. And then the underside of that sheathing within a year is black and moldy.
I had to do that. Sorry.
Nice. Love it.
But yeah, and I think Florida building code says that you have to, have that up there just for protection with wind.
Yes. Yeah, they do. The Miami-Dade code and everything else. We just saw that at SCBC. That was one of the big things that they're moving towards, and that counties are dealing with.
David Applebaum has had to put in California because of this tightness going on in the attic space. They kind of they're dormers, I guess, right? And they look like graves, if you will, like a tombstone. And he's putting like 15 of them on the roofs in conjunction with having your roof vent and your vents going out on the side. So they have to put extra in to ventilate these attics, because if they don't, they're getting too much condensation and like differential in temperature.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you know what? I'm sure there's a building science and testing that's been done on that, and here back in the Northwest or Northeast, and even where you are, Eric, I'm sure roof scoops and everything else were used, where if so many square feet of roof space, a vent would have to go into the roof. But in California and the fires and everything else, I would probably have minimal amount of penetrations, and I would definitely have some kind of a system to manage that, ventilation system that's in the attic space instead. That would have to have dampers on it.
Yeah, they have. I mean, that's what David's been doing, because, like I said, they used asphalt roofs now instead of the expandable. They used to use the shingles that would breathe and open up for the with wood, but because of fire code, they can't use those anymore. So they went with the asphalt, and when they did, the heat, I guess, is getting trapped in. And then with the air conditioned top floor, so everybody's got their air conditioning on because it's 100 degrees in Southern California. It's sweating. You're getting all this water that's sweating off the ducts and the vents in the attic space, and they all have mold now.
If it was me, I would put the right amount in. If I was in Southern California, I'd put the right amount of roof vents in, fire or not, and then I'd just make sure that everything down below was covered in rock wool. So if I did get any embers and stuff blowing in, it's landing on the rock wool. And I know that's not going to take off and become a problem. So if I did get some sparks that came up and around through a roof vent,
that's a good idea.
Landing on the rock wool, and guess what? I know it's not going to burn there. And it takes a lot to get in and get into where it's going to light the roof framing on fire. That's a big ask at that point.
That's a great point, Eric. And I think,
that's a good idea.
if and when rock wool comes in with a blown-in insulation method, that will really be able to take off and run. But even if they did some kind of a spray foam to seal that ceiling and then put rock wool over the top of it to protect it, you could probably get enough R value where that condensation and everything else doesn't occur. Too many of this ductwork and everything else isn't in conditioned spaces. So like I add a foot to all my ceiling heights on the second floor just so I can run ductwork in it and then seal it off from the attic. Raised heel trusses. I'm getting a truss already. I'm not stick framing it. They can build that right into that truss package, and then all of the mechanicals will run right through it, and we don't have any issues with that. So there's definitely some ways around it.
That's
but
good.
Eric, I love the thought of that rock wool. That's brilliant.
That's just an idea.
What is rock wool, Eric? What is it actually
as
made
well,
out of?
but it's a mineral wool. So basically, it's a spun mineral. Think of almost like cotton candy, right? They take it and spin it out, and so it's a mineral. But it feels like a regular insulation board or insulation bat to some extent. You want to use gloves and you cut it with their rock wool knife or one of those insulation board knives, but it goes in really easy. I've got half my garage done with it just because, one, it does so awesome with sound, and with moisture and fire, it just outperforms everything else.
And that would just substitute in for your fiberglass. You would just use that instead of using a fiberglass insulation, which is nasty. And
I actually incorporated it on all the exteriors of our building so that I get a 2-inch comfort board from Rockwell on the outside of my building, so that I push the dew point to the exterior of my sheathing. So that way I control Mother Nature, and anything she's going to bring at me goes to the outside, tying it back into our WRB where all that moisture should be to begin with. And then all I have to manage is, the moisture that's coming off of the residents that are living inside the house.
Yeah. I also use it. I also use it in interiors around every bathroom. I've always insulated around bathrooms with that because that stuff is such an amazing sound barrier. I love putting it around bathrooms and even between bedrooms in more custom homes just to keep things quiet. Not so much. And well, you've also filled a stud bay with a fireproof product as well. So it doesn't hurt in that aspect.
Absolutely. It's a great product all around. I mean, fire, insect proof, water drainability, and soundproofing. I live right by an airport.
Is it less itchy too? Like when you work with it, like, I can't stand working with insulation because it constantly itches me. And is it less itchy?
Well, no, it still itches, but it's not quite as bad, depending on who you are. Like I work with it throughout the day, no problem. My brother touches it and, he's like, oh my God, I'm going to kill you for making me work with this stuff. It's just how your skin reacts to it. But I wear gloves.
I have to wear gloves to use it. It'll tear my hands up. So other than that, it's fine. But
think of it as made by volcanic rock, and it's just heated up and broken down and spun.
Yeah.
So.
That's wild.
It's cool stuff. Cool. Well, Walt, I wanted to talk about one other thing that fits into this that's really important that I think is one of the most unknown things to most homeowners and even DIYers and some remodelers out there. Rain screens.
Yes.
We can talk about
rain
WRBs, but let's talk about what a rain screen is so people understand where you use that and what you'd use it for.
Absolutely. So I'm going to have my exterior sheathing, whether it's a zip or a plywood on the house. I'm going to then put my WRB on it, or if I'm using zip, it's already built in. I'm going to install those properly. But now, in my neck of the woods, I'm going to put at least a 3/8 rain screen, which can be a dimple mat, is what Benjamin Obdykes first started with and came out with. They called it Cedar Breather for roofs. Great product, still one of the top of the line products that's out there. Or you can use some core vent. You can use a variety of different ways to create this airflow. And what it does is it allows air and moisture that's trapped that comes out of the house and through that WRB, a drainage plane to get down to the ground and out of the building. One of the other things it does, especially if you're using any kind of a wood product, if you're using cedar, clapboard, or anything on the outside of your house, think of it. A lot of times this stuff goes up primed or bare and then gets painted. So that means it's only breathing to one side. That's the inside of the house. And if it's nailed directly to the wall, it has no place for that moisture to go. Yep. So that's why you see paint bubble and everything else, because it's trying to push out and the paint has now sealed it tight and into the wood. So if you give it that gap, and again, 3/8 was always kind of the go-to number. Depending on how much rain you get in your climate zone and everything else, I've seen it all the way up to 3/4 of an inch. There are scientists out there that'll tell you need more than that. I've never ran into it, but the reality is you can get it all the way down to 1/8 of an inch now. So there's a lot of wraps. HydroGap is one of them that's out there, but basically these dimpled drain wraps from like Tyvek and DuPont that just allow that moisture, a place and a channel to run out from behind the siding, but in front of the sheathing. So we incorporate them into every single build we do because they are another control layer that's just as important as the WRB.
So that's just direct. That's the freeway for the moisture that's coming from the building and or through the exterior material that is your finished material. You're giving it a place to drop down and head down towards the bottom because it wants to leave and exit the building, shall we say.
That's exactly correct. Yeah.
I always pictured it like a gap wall. Like I remember when they, back in when I did green building in architecture school, it was like a plane.
Yes.
And it almost looks like a gapping that's in between, for layman, right? It was like this gap that was there.
Caroline, you could use some 3/4 inch furring strips.
Yeah.
And just nail it right on top. Or you could use some 1/2 inch plywood or whatever, and put it right on top of your sheathing or your WRB. And yes, that would create that channel. And that's exactly what it's for. It's just so that air can flow through it and moisture can be released.
What I do like with the rain screen technology you see out there now, though, where it's kind of some of those woven fabrics that almost look like your Brillo pad and some of that.
Yes.
What I like about that is it doesn't give a place for spiders, pests, and stuff to go hang out easily.
Yes.
So if you have a 3/4 inch gap and you get a hole someplace, technically that could be your next wasp nest. That could be your next beehive.
Wasp.
Having a material in there that kind of keeps that from happening is not a bad idea.
No, not at all. I mean, and there's like I said, there's two products that I know on the market that do a really good job on that, and that's the Benjamin Obdyke and the DuPont products. And those come.
Is it like wavy? I haven't seen it, Eric. What does it look like? Is it
I have it in here. I don't, but it's
it kind of looks a little bit like Swiss cheese on the backside, and then it's got a layer that almost looks like a WRB on the front of it, and it's glued together. And these dimples are like 1-inch circles that are abutting in honeycomb form. Yeah. So that when you put it down, wherever you nail it, it doesn't sink in enough to stop that channel or that airflow to be there. You can put it up with like a Stinger 2-inch cap fasteners and staples.
Think of the top of a Lego, right? Think of a top of a Lego where you got the little dimples.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of what this is as far as the texture.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha.
So, Eric, one thing I think I'd like to just throw out there is, you were talking about, what your homeowners, should think about as far as WRBs or how do you know they're using a good one when they're talking to the contractor. I just kind of have my 5 go-tos that I'd just throw out to you guys. You can use them if you want or you research them. But, you have your Tyvek of the world. They created house wrap. They're still probably one of the best on the market. Typar is a phenomenal product as well. You then move into your fully adhered Blueskin, Henry Blueskin. You got your zip panels fully integrated with just a tape. Then Siga. Siga is a Swiss company that doesn't do a ton of marketing over here, but anybody that's like a passive house builder or building to a high performance is using a Siga product, and also just phenomenal. So if you as a listener hear any of those 5 products brought up by your builder, that builder probably knows what they're doing. And it's worth you're going to get a nice education because they've chosen a product because they trust it and they like the system.
And they probably have the relationship to be able to get the product, which is half the battle, right?
Correct.
I mean, I see this all the time, and I can't tell you how many times I'm driving around and I see, for instance, I'll see product A up there because I'm not going to name names because it's not fair. But all of a sudden I see product B tape on it or product C tape on it. And it's just because, or I'll see even worse where I'll have the product A is the house wrap, the tape is product B, and product C is the flexible flashing around the windows. That's because that's what they could get,
right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Which one is...
So is it bad to mix? Like, should people not be doing that? Is that, is that not okay?
Unfortunately, some of these products do work out all right together. When you have an acrylic tape with an acrylic product or a product that it accepts acrylic, then yes. But, you have bitumen-based products, you have butyl-based products, you have acrylic-based products, and 2-3 of those, don't work well together. So, it may feel like they sealed up as you're installing it and you're like, hey, this is great. But the minute you turn your back, you're going to cover that up with some siding and then it's going to fail. So no. And then some of them will eat away at the others, the coatings that are on them. And
don't mix and match.
And even worse, if you have some kind of warranty claim, you have just now given them the most basic excuse to not cover that warranty is, oh, you use that tape. Oh, you use that flexible flashing. As soon as you get that rollout, just remember that warranty is what just left the building.
100% correct, Eric. I mean, every builder's like, well, if I use the whole system, then you get the warranty from the manufacturer.
And the problem is if you're a builder out there doing it, now you've assumed that warranty personally with your company because now you don't have a manufacturer standing behind you. So within that period, we see all the apartment complexes, condo units, houses and neighborhoods where they're in there re-siding them. You don't want that coming out of your insurance.
Definitely not. Not my insurance. My insurance company doesn't want to hear that at all. And I want my rates to stay low. So yes, I follow the prescribed method.
Amen. Amen. Well, Walt, what else have we missed about this? I mean, we didn't really talk too much about flexible flashing, even though that's kind of part of the process. We talked about it last time, but I think it's probably still worth mentioning, at least around the windows and doors, how people are finishing off these WRBs so they understand the whole process.
Yeah, I think windows are one of those tricky areas, like inside corners on the siding where, tapes, standard tapes and everything else, if you just push them in on the flat and everything else, they'll create a cove almost, like an air gap. And then when you go to slide that window in or the sider gets there to push the siding tight, it doesn't push, it doesn't sit flush. So then the knife comes out and that gets cut. And now all that tape, all that money was just spent is gone literally right out the window. So they make flex wrap, they make the stretch wraps, they make all these new products that even though they stretch to twice their size, they have 100% water sealability and integrity, which allows us to apply the pressure where we need to get it tucked in nice and tight and then wrap right around from that jamb of the interior of that window opening to the outside and get it over the top on the bottom of our window of the WRB and then tuck on the sides and above it the WRB over the top of that flashing so it watersheds properly. But really, it allows us to not have to use fasteners so we don't have any penetrations. And then most of these products are self-sealing so that when the window screws and everything else go through them, they seal the fastener to the tapes, which is key so that we're not having any issues with moisture penetrating into that frame. So don't be afraid of these flex wraps. I will tell you that the first couple times you use them, cut a 1 foot strip off and do a corner with just 1 foot. So it's going 6 inches up the jamb and 6 inches on the sill, and then cut a piece of straight flashing to fit in between and over the top of that. Because if you mess up a 1 foot piece that cost, I don't know, maybe $4 or $5 a linear foot, you're not as mad as when you peel off 4 feet and realize you just wasted $30 and you're scratching your head going, man, I don't ever want to do this again.
See, I'm excessive. I use that stuff when I put fence posts into my yard. I wrap the whole bottom of the post before I put the pressure treated post in just to keep the water out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the freeze thaws, all those pressure treated posts, they say that they're warranted except for a ground contact. Right. So you're doing a great job. That's a great thing to think about and just seal these so that they last as long as that wood should.
Exactly. And that way I'm not fixing it later. Walt, thanks for coming on today, brother. This has been a great education for everyone. Walt. And
such a smarty pants.
I'm glad that's recorded because I want to play that back for my kids.
Yep.
Well, your kids will never think you're smart, no. Walt. That's a
Walt,
given.
I'll cut that and send it in your email box for you. That way it's sitting there.
Yes.
Perfect. I appreciate that, my friend.
That way it'll be the ringtone for when Caroline calls you.
Yes.
Exactly.
Help me.
I love
Thanks
it.
for coming on, brother.
Well,
always good, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. Take care.
I'm Eric G.
And I'm Caroline B.
And you've been listening to Around the House.
Discovered anyway out beyond the mean. Life is a love song. Let's be lovers. We're all over the radio. Take my hand, I know where to go. All over the radio with you.
Hey, it's Eric G. from Around the House. Are you planning a decking or siding project this year? If you are, you've got to check out my friends at Millboard. Millboard is a completely different kind of composite decking and cladding that enhances outdoor spaces with enduring distinction. Hand-molded from the finest oak, it realistically mimics the natural grain and color of premium hardwood. If you're looking for something that doesn't look like plastic and instead real wood, check out millboard.com. Make sure and check out that interview we did just a few weeks back. That's millboard.com.